York Times broke the story that in the aftermath of the January 6th insurrection, an upside-down American flag used by many pro-Trump Stop the Steal protesters had been hoisted at the house of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. This photo, obtained by the New York Times, was reportedly taken on January the 17th, 11 days after the storming of the Capitol. Alito telling the New York Times, quote, "I had no involvement whatsoever in the flying of the flag. It was briefly placed by Mrs. Alito in response to a neighbor's use of an objectionable and personally insulting language on yard signs." Okay, so taking Justice Alito at his word, his wife put up the upside-down flag, but regardless, it's a really bad look. I'm not going to defend it in any way. It doesn't make a lot of sense as a response either to a neighbor dispute over an objectionable sign. You know, never should happen, especially when it came at a time when Alito was deciding whether to hear a case brought by the allies of Donald Trump over Pennsylvania's voting system in regard to the 2020 election results. But there's also a hint of hypocrisy from many on the left, now calling for Alito to recuse himself from any Trump-related cases or even resign.
There should be an impeachment inquiry. There's no excuse for it.
But were the same people now calling for Alito's impeachment equally outraged at these 2016 comments from Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg about then presidential candidate Donald Trump? She said, "He's a faker. He has no consistency about him. He says whatever comes into his head at the moment. He really has an ego. How has he gotten away with not turning over his tax returns? The press seems to be very gentle with him on that." I don't seem to remember the left-wing media going for Ruth Bader Ginsburg's impeachment or even resignation. And by the way, there's an argument that that was worse. I mean, taking Alito at his word, this was his wife's decision, and sure, he should have avoided it because it's their home. But those were Ruth Bader Ginsburg's own words, and she said other things, too, in a few months before a presidential election, too. And if we're going to blame the spouse, I mean, look, on that, I'd argue that Ginny Thomas, wife of Clarence Thomas, what she did regarding January 6th was worse. Remember, Thomas attended the Stop the Steal rally in D.C., later led to the storming of the Capitol. She actively tried to help overturn the election results, texting White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, urging him to reverse the election results, and then calling legislators in Arizona as well. Remember, she said, "Help this great president stand firm, Mark. You're the leader with him, standing for America's governance," et cetera, et cetera. The left is attempting the greatest heist in our history. She wrote dozens of emails calling on Republican legislators, et cetera, et cetera. So the question becomes, is this something where we really are going to be calling for impeachment or resignation? Let's talk to Richard Goodstein, former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton, about this. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Good to see you again. Sure, look, obviously, I think we agree this is bad, shouldn't have done it. What do you make about my point of the left is now sort of outraged at Alito over this, and yet Ruth Bader Ginsburg made a number of comments leading up to Donald Trump's election where it was very clear she did not like Donald Trump, and they were incredibly political.
So the standard, as you know, for recusal is, can the justice's impartiality be reasonably questioned? So let's imagine, we do hypotheticals in the Supreme Court, right? Imagine the flag said, "I stand with the insurrectionists." And then the insurrectionists had a case before the Supreme Court. Or it might say, "Donald Trump is my king." And then Donald Trump had a case before the Supreme Court. So are we just quibbling over whether they should have had his and her flagpoles? I mean, are we really buying this notion? The neighbors say this was up for days, that somehow or other this is not imputable to Justice Alito. I think that's giving him way too much credit for somebody who, as you know, Dan, thought nothing about taking, ridiculously expensive trips with right-wing interests that had, matters before the Supreme Court. He mouthed the words "not true" when Obama said something about Citizens United that was true.
So let me ask you this.
He's a partisan.
Let's assume that Justice Ginsburg had survived and was hearing one of the Trump-related cases in 2021, right? Would you say she should recuse herself based on the comments that she made about Donald Trump?
I would say that what she said was not as specific to the matter, his being a faker and being a fraud, was not as specific to the matter before the court. I mean, we know that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor was at an election night party in 2000, and when it was reported that Florida was won by Gore, she went, oh, no. So should she have recused herself when there was Bush v. Gore? No. I mean, I think it showed where her sympathies were, as Justice Ginsburg did. But this was not about a matter before the court. What Alito was doing and kind of opining on through his wife, so he says, was really more specific to a matter before the court.